What happens when there is a US Africa, Turkey African, Russian African, or Indian African summit? Well, African heads of state of 54 countries have to travel to that particular host country to participate in the summit. Just like school kids, African leaders are summoned and filled into buses to meet the head of the host country. That's not how respect is given. African leaders are not servants who would just leave everything to go and hear what the Western countries want to say. No African leader has noticed and criticized this, but enough is enough now. If the US wants to have a summit with African leaders, it should come to the African Union, where all African states are present. If there are any requests, the US should convey them, and the African countries would think about that. That's what the president of Kenya, William Ruto, said at a conference, slamming how the world does not care about giving respect to African countries and leaders. But he said more, which has made the West ashamed, and they are hiding their faces. Let's find out how African leaders have been treated like kids and how this has to be over. Let's get started. Just recently, Kenyan President William Ruto engaged in a candid discussion that made the Western world ashamed of its policies. Not only that, but it also questioned African leaders' willingness to subordinate the West's orders. Ruto said that the world should respect African leaders, asserting that they should not be treated as inferior to leaders from other parts of the world. Speaking at the 2023 IGW African Leadership Ceremony, alongside Mo Ibrahim, President Ruto highlighted that African leaders, elected by their people, deserve the same level of respect as their global counterparts. In reference to his participation in the U.S. Africa Leaders Summit in Washington, D.C., with President Joseph R. Biden last December, President Ruto expressed dissatisfaction with the fact that, despite the presence of 50 African leaders, they were unable to secure a one-on-one meeting with President Biden. He criticized such arrangements where African presidents travel to meet with the leader of a single country, deeming it unjust. President Ruto suggested that the African Union should represent Africa in group meetings, allowing African leaders to collaborate and have a more robust presence on the global stage. This reflects a growing sense of pride and self-determination among African leaders challenging Western dominance and advocating for increased representation in global affairs. Ruto's remarks stress African unity in the face of external pressures. By asserting their right to be treated as equal partners, African leaders convey a message that they will not be dictated to or bullied by more powerful nations. In a conversation with Mo Ibrahim, Ruto provided an example saying, "Let me give you a case in point. We decided, for example, that we are going to assemble our market using the Africa Continental Free Trade Area market. That's a good ecosystem. And the positive thing is that it was unbelievable at the rate at which we were able to achieve consensus and ratification. And I want to tell you, it is among the things that happened in the shortest time possible. It tells you there is a greater realization that unless we act in concert, unless we act together, we are unlikely to make any impact anywhere. We have, at least on the market issue, put that together." He further said there's a forthcoming debate, and African leaders have decided to change the status quo. African leaders are organizing meetings, including the Africa-US meeting, Africa-Europe, Africa-Turkey, Africa-India, Africa-Russia, and Africa-Japan. However, it has now been concluded that it's not practical for all 54 African leaders to gather before an individual from another place. Ruto said African leaders are sometimes treated unfairly and loaded into buses like school kids. It's unjust. So, as the AU, he said that we have decided that going forward, if there's a discussion between Africa and any other country, our representation will be led by the chair of the African Union Commission. If the West is not ready to give respect, that's fine. African countries will not give respect in return. Until now, being humble, African leaders have not made this an issue, but enough is enough now. This newfound assertiveness holds the potential to recalibrate power dynamics in international relations, offering African nations a more influential voice and cultivating greater respect for their sovereignty and independence. You should know that in September, Ruto, alongside fellow African presidents, took a bus to Buckingham Palace in the United Kingdom for the funeral service of the late Queen Elizabeth II. He sat in the back left seat, accompanied by his wife, Rachel Ruto. President William Ruto has brought attention to African presidents' challenges during foreign trips. Ruto expressed dissatisfaction with how African heads are treated, pointing to instances where they face mistreatment. Would Joe Biden, Emmanuel Macron, King Charles, or another Western leader like to sit in the back seat of the bus when they come to Africa? If they like themselves to be treated with respect, they should treat African leaders with respect. Otherwise, from now on, if any Western leader comes to Africa, they will be picked up from the airport on local buses. Ruto specifically mentioned an incident where African presidents were collectively transported in a bus to attend Queen Elizabeth's funeral ceremony in the UK. Speaking at the Mo Ibrahim Governance Weekend at the Kenya International Convention Center on Saturday, Ruto underscored that it is inappropriate for African presidents to endure mistreatment. He stated, "We have these meetings, Africa-US, Africa-Europe, Africa-Turkey, and now we are waiting for Africa-Russia and Africa-Japan. We have made the decision that it is not intelligent for all 54 of us to go and sit before one gentleman from another place. Sometimes we are mistreated, loaded into buses like school children, and it is not right." Notably, while other international presidents used their own private vehicles for the funeral, U.S. President Joe Biden and the First Lady traveled in the armor-plated Cadillac known as the Beast. This shows how Western leaders have double standards. But that's not the only moment when African leaders were not respected. Whenever the 54 heads of state of Africa are called to participate in a summit where only one person will meet them collectively, it's disrespectful. The U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit, held in Washington, D.C. from December 13 to 15, 2022, brought together delegates from 49 African countries and the African Union. The summit primarily focused on strengthening and expanding the partnership between the U.S. and Africa, emphasizing the significant role of African voices in addressing global challenges. Despite the goals, the summit showed how little the U.S. and its president care about respecting the African leaders. Just imagine how disrespectful it is that Joe Biden called 49 African presidents to the U.S., sitting in the middle as if he was the master and the African presidents were his servants. He did not even do a one-on-one meeting. Instead, he met all African leaders collectively, showing how the U.S. is willing to engage with Africa. These are the subtle cues that show what a country really wants from Africa. Challenges arose despite an ambitious agenda and a clear objective of resetting U.S.-Africa relations on a more equitable foundation. A week before the summit commenced, concerns were raised about the absence of scheduled bilateral meetings between President Joe Biden and the heads of state in attendance. Nonetheless, President Biden did express personal support for the African Union's permanent membership in the G20 and hosted a dinner for the leaders. Secretary of State Blinken and other senior officials from the State Department also interacted with numerous heads of state and foreign ministers. All this could be done by sending Joe Biden to Africa instead of calling 49 heads of state of African nations. If Joe Biden's ego does not allow him to go to Africa to meet heads of state, African leaders should not have gone either. However, despite showing that the U.S. does not offer a partnership of equals, the U.S. government is trying hard to strengthen the illusion. In a speech delivered in South Africa, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken affirmed that the United States views the 54 nations of Africa as equal partners in addressing global challenges. Speaking at the University of Pretoria, Blinken outlined the Biden administration's Africa policies, underscoring the region's pivotal role in shaping historical, current, and future geopolitical dynamics. Blinken articulated a strategy centered on collaboration with African nations, stressing the paramount importance of working together as equal partners to accomplish shared priorities. Blinken's address garnered positive responses from South African academics and students, marking a comprehensive declaration of U.S. intentions towards sub-Saharan Africa. Criticized in the past for overlooking the continent, the United States' recent efforts aim to counter the growing influence of Russia and China. The top U.S. diplomat's visit to South Africa was a part of a three-nation tour across Africa, including Congo and Rwanda. This tour was perceived as a competition between Western nations and Russia to secure support from African countries amid the conflict in Ukraine. Blinken's visit followed trips to Africa by Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov and French President Emmanuel Macron. You see, whenever the Western leaders need Africa's support, They come and try to proclaim the rhetoric that they are equal partners. However, their past actions show something else, stressing that they are engaging just for the immediate benefits Africa will offer. However, like many other African nations, South Africa maintained a neutral stance on the Ukraine war. Prior to Blinken's speech, he met with South Africa's Minister of International Relations, Naledi Pandor, who reiterated her country's reluctance to criticize Russia for its invasion of Ukraine. In a subsequent press briefing, Pandor criticized the US and other Western powers for overly focusing on the Ukraine conflict at the expense of other international issues. Blinken had earlier stated that their positive rapport would facilitate candid discussions about their differences, expressing confidence in the robust US-South Africa relations. Notably, several African countries, including those with security deals with the Wagner Group, a Russian mercenary organization, have refrained from condemning the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Moreover, sub-Saharan nations have substantially received Chinese investment through the Belt and Road Initiative, supporting infrastructure development. This shows quite a different pattern. Africa is in no mood to get used and then disposed of by the West. Here's a reminder to please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black culture, history, civilization, and identity. Let's continue now. It's essential that the United States regard Africa as a partner, not merely a pawn in global affairs. Throughout much of their post-independence history, successive U.S. administrations have tended to view African countries through the lens of geopolitical conflicts and competition. Initially, during the Cold War, nations in Africa were classified as either pro-West or pro-communist, in the context of the U.S. rivalry with the Soviet Union. Following the events of 9/11, U.S. attention shifted predominantly towards countries dealing with insurgency threats from local branches or affiliates of Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State. The current strategic focus revolves around China, which has actively involved Africa with significant investments, loans, and large-scale construction projects. The August release of the U.S. Strategy Towards Sub-Saharan Africa document explicitly positions China as the primary global rival for influence in the 21st century. However, this narrow perspective overlooks the continent's inherent power and extensive economic potential. By 2050, Africa is projected to be home to 1/4 of the world's population, with half under 25. Notably, Africa already represents the world's largest geographic free trade area, and its gross domestic product is estimated to reach as high as $29 trillion by 2050. During the US-Africa Summit, African leaders were not impressed. It's because promises of increased engagement are not a new phenomenon from US presidents. George W. Bush, during his presidency, made 3 trips to Africa and initiated an emergency plan for AIDS relief that earned lasting goodwill. Mr. Obama, during his tenure, visited the continent 4 times and launched an initiative to enhance Africa's power needs, which unfortunately fell short of expectations. In contrast, Donald Trump never visited the continent during his presidency and is primarily remembered for making derogatory remarks about African countries. The path forward involves treating African countries as full equals, engaging in uncomfortable discussions about the need for genuine democracy, offering technological assistance, and persuading the private sector to invest in initiatives like Power Africa and the Growth and Opportunity Act. These elements can form the foundation of a new American relationship with Africa, rooted in a commitment to prosperity, enduring democratic institutions, and mutual respect, acknowledging that both sides stand to gain significantly. But nothing is possible unless African leaders are treated with respect. And that's not just a problem on the part of the US. The same was the case in the 2019 Russia-Africa Summit, when 43 African countries sent their delegations and 34 heads of state of African countries attended the summit. Later, in 2023, 49 African countries sent their delegations to the Russian-African Summit. We see the same pattern in the European Union. Africa Summit, where African leaders have to go to the European Union Parliament as if they are servants. However, China's policy toward Africa is different, as it offers equal respect and benefits. China does not only plan to grow alone, but also wants Africa to grow with it by mutual engagement. It's the only way China will grow more. That's why, unlike any other country, China has built more visible symbols across the continent, including presidential palaces, parliament buildings, soccer stadiums, military academies, rail lines, and conference centers. China constructed the African Union headquarters in Addis Ababa, and recently, ground was broken on a new $32 million Chinese-built headquarters for ECOWAS, the Economic Community of West African States, in Abuja, Nigeria. However, China is not the only player in Africa. Russia, Turkey, and the United Arab Emirates have also become significant presences, with Russia supplying weapons and Turkey and the UAE constructing mosques, hospitals, and ports. However, China is not limited to just construction in Africa. It is more than willing to engage with all African countries on equal terms, respecting them like a superpower. As early as 2013, when Xi Jinping became China's president for the first time, he conveyed to Africans his desire for an equitable relationship that contributed to the continent's development, addressing concerns that China was primarily interested in extracting raw materials. Renewing a pledge of $20 billion in loans to Africa between 2013 and 2015, Xi committed to assisting African countries in leveraging their resource endowment for independent and sustainable development. Xi emphasized China's willingness to assist in Africa without political strings attached and reiterated the commitment to treating each other as equals, receiving applause from the audience. You see, China is the only superpower that offers assistance and equal partnership without expecting countries to endorse its policies. Rwandan President Paul Kagame has affirmed the nature of China's relations with Africa, stating that the global economic powerhouse treats Africa as an equal partner in their interactions. Kagame said that he wanted to say a few words from the heart. The growing relationship with China is based as much on mutual respect as on mutual interests. That is evident in Xi Jinping's personal commitment to the African continent. More generally, China relates to Africa as an equal. Africans see themselves as a people on the road to prosperity. China's actions demonstrate that it sees Africa in the same way. This is a revolutionary posture in world affairs, and it is more precious than money, Kagame emphasized. He expressed these sentiments following a meeting with the visiting Chinese leader, Xi Jinping, and his wife, Peng Liyuan, who arrived in Rwanda for a two-day official visit. Trade records reveal an upward trajectory in China's trade with Africa. Before reaching Kigali, Xi had visited Senegal as part of the first leg of his African tour. President of Namibia, Hage Geingob, emphasized China's distinct approach among global superpowers, noting their willingness to engage in face-to-face meetings with African leaders rather than delegating deputies, a practice common in many other nations. This direct commitment from China was viewed as a meaningful gesture that strengthened bilateral relations. You see, offering equal respect and mutual cooperation is the principle of China's foreign policy, and that's how it has become a country that has dominated the world. China has never used any force against any country, but despite this, it has relations with most countries on the planet. This is only possible when a country respects and forges a relationship of honesty and mutual cooperation, something the Western world must learn. Reflecting on his 2018 state visit to China and meeting with Chinese President Xi Jinping, Geingob emphasized the significance of these personal interactions. He drew a comparison with other countries that opted for deputy representation, emphasizing the importance of treating African nations as equals in diplomatic conversations. Geingob's comments came after a courtesy call from outgoing Chinese ambassador Zhang Yiming, who soon returned to China. Geingob addressed concerns about China's influence in Namibia and Africa, rejecting any notion of a second colonization. Despite China's superpower status, Geingob acknowledged the absence of historical colonizers in the region, distinguishing China's engagement from traditional colonial practices. At this, African leaders get two choices. They can continue engaging with the Western world and going to these countries like school kids. They can accept to be mistreated and disrespected for nothing. On the other hand, they can engage with China, which offers equal respect no matter how weaker or smaller a country is. What do you think? Should African leaders continue engaging with the Western world that does not respect them? Or should they boycott them unless they are respected and engaged as China does? Let us know your thoughts in the comment section right below on whether the African leaders should unite and get the West to respect them at all costs. Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If yes, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about: the Black culture, civilization, history, and evidence about how glorious Blacks have been. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.